What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burtonette. We have arrived to the pinnacle of the sport. The national championship game will be played this Monday in Miami, Florida at Hard Rock Stadium. It is the biggest game on the college football calendar every single year. The debate rages on whether it should be on Monday or on Saturday, or more appropriately, perhaps even on New Year's Day. That's a debate for another time. In this video, I'm going to be talking about everything you need to know about this national championship game, going over a look at the coaches, position by position, where each team has strengths, and ultimately giving my prediction for who I think wins the national championship. But before I get into all of that, if you're going to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I upload. Getting things started, though. This has been two very different rises to the top for two very different but similarly methodical and calculated coaches. For Curt Cignetti, it is another example of a microwave rebuild. He did the same at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. A little bit of confusion there. It's Indiana University, but it's in Pennsylvania, where they were 4-10 in conference play in the previous two seasons before he took over. They then went 7-3 overall, and then 12-2, and went 53-17 in his time there. Interestingly, kind of a side note here, an interesting story is that he took over for his dad, Frank Cignetti Sr., who coached the team from 1986 to 2005, winning 182 games and coaching a Hall of Fame career. Frank Cignetti Sr. is in the College Football Hall of Fame, and he finished his career with 199 career wins, one short of that historic 200 mark, but he was an incredible coach. So Curt Cignetti had to kind of follow in his dad's footsteps there, no pressure, and he delivered in the time, though it was a little bit shorter. Then at Elon, kind of similar when he took over there, they were 4-20 in conference play. He then guided them to an 8-4 season and a 6-2 finish in a Colonial Athletic Association Conference Championship, which of course gave them an auto bid into the FCS playoff. They went 15-9, I think, over two seasons there, and then he moved on to James Madison. At James Madison, the Dukes were 9-4 the year before he took over. Now, it's worth noting that this was a pretty established program. They were 14-1 2 years before Cignetti took over, but he quickly took them to a 14-2 season and an FCS national championship appearance against North Dakota State. They went 19-4 then once they moved up to the FBS level, and Cignetti was 52-9 at James Madison. Then, of course, the big move to Indiana, taking over the losingest team in not only Big Ten history, but college football history, and taking over a team that went 3-9 in 2023. He turned the Hoosiers around, led in large part, of course, by Curtis Rourke, a solid defense, a lot of those guys that have come back for this season, and a big transfer class that came in from his previous stop at James Madison. They went 11-2 last year. Obviously, only losses were to the two teams who played in the national championship game, Ohio State during the regular season, and then Notre Dame in the first round of the college football playoffs. This year, it's been even better for Indiana. They've gone 15-0. They have been really they played second fiddle to Ohio State for most of the season, but then they beat those Buckeyes in the Big Ten championship game and became the preemptive favorite going into the college football playoff, though a lot of people, myself included, still had faith in the Buckeyes to potentially beat them if they had a chance, or at the very least get past Miami. And that brings us then to the next team that's in this national championship game, and that's the Miami Hurricanes. It has been a slow build and a little bit of redemption for Mario Cristobal. This is a program that, of course, has a rich history. 5 national titles. They're going for their 6th. They had 4 in an 8 or 9 year span in the 80s and early 90s, and then, of course, had kind of a resurgence in the early 2000s. For Cristobal, he spent several seasons, 6 seasons at Florida International, where he didn't really do a whole lot, honestly. He was 27-47. Then he spent 4 years really developing as a coach under Nick Saban. Like Curt Cignetti did, he spent time as an assistant at Alabama. Mario Cristobal spent 4 years at Alabama from 2013 to 2016, winning a national championship along the way. Then he became the Oregon co-offensive coordinator and offensive line coach in 2017 before being promoted to the head coach ahead of the 2018 season. From there, he went 35-13 over his 4 seasons with the Ducks. Obviously, one of those was shortened by COVID, the 2020 season. And then kind of a surprising move that honestly doesn't maybe get as much attention as a different move that happened, because it was the same offseason that Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma for USC. And I think oddly enough, those two teams, Oregon and Oklahoma, were matched up in the Alamo Bowl. So they both were two teams without their main head coach at the position. And obviously there was a lot of backlash for Lincoln Riley, not as much for Mario Cristobal. I think it helped that, he left for Oregon after a successful, I think, 10-3 season. And it kind of got swept under the rug because of Lincoln Riley's move to USC. Then once he did go to Miami, he went 5-7 his first season, which was the same record the Canes had the year before. Then in the 2023 season, it was a case of a good start, 4-0. There wasn't like a marquee win, but they got into the rankings. And then an inexplicable loss, terrible late game management in that one that started to get people questioning whether he was the right guy. And then things only got worse in that after that loss, which came to Georgia Tech, where they didn't kneel the ball down when they should have with the time running down in the game. They lose that game, and they end up losing 6 of the final 9 games of the season and finishing 7-6. So a really bad finish there, an absolute collapse. And then it was kind of similar, though not as bad, the next season. Last year, they finished 10-3. They were 9-0, up to number 4 in the country. Then they lost to 5-4 Georgia Tech, and again a couple weeks later against Syracuse. Now, Syracuse was a 10-win team last season, but that was what ultimately kept Miami out of the college football playoff last year. This year, they had kind of a couple of those inexplicable losses. Again, they were, 5 or 6-0. They lose to Louisville. Then they bounce back a little bit, start getting their groove, and then they get stunned by SMU, a loss that had a lot of people wondering if they were going to even get into the field. I think a lot of people now might forget that Miami just sneaked in really by virtue of their early season Week 1 win over Notre Dame. If it wasn't for that, Miami wouldn't have been in the playoff, even with that 10-2 record. If that win was against a Sun Belt team or some other team, locally, not a Power 4 team, Notre Dame does look good, and so that ultimately vaults them here. Another thing of note, kind of interesting, is that Mario Cristobal was teammates with Indiana quarterback Fernando Mendoza's dad. Obviously, Mendoza's from Miami, grew up there, and there's that kind of interesting tie-in as well. But now that we have kind of the backstory, it's time to look at this game and really dive in full scale. I want to start by kind of comparing the Indiana offense against the Miami defense. Starting things out, Indiana averages 461 yards per game, 243 basically, of which is passing, 218 rushing, and 42.6 points per game, which ranks second nationally. Miami, meanwhile, has a pretty solid defense. They don't rank like in the absolute top of the nation in any of these categories, except for points per game allowed. They've only averaged 14 points per game allowed, 292.6 yards per game, 206.1 passing, 86.5 rushing. On third down, Indiana converts 58.2% of the time, while Miami only gives up third down conversions to their opponents 30.8% of the time. Of course, the Indiana offense is spearheaded by the Heisman Trophy winner, Fernando Mendoza. He was 257 for 352 passing so far this season, 3,349 yards, 41 touchdowns, and just 6 interceptions. So he does an exceptional job of taking care of the ball and obviously loves to air it out as well. The main guys he airs it out to are Elijah Sarratt, Omar Cooper, and Charlie Becker. That trio has accounted for almost 2,300 of those yards and 32 of those 41 touchdowns. So those are the 3 guys. Of course, they have a couple other guys that they throw to, but 3/4 of their touchdowns have gone to both of those guys and 2/3 of their passing yards. So those are the 3 guys that Miami is going to be matching up against. Now, of course, Indiana as well on the ground does a pretty good job running it. Actually, a really good job. Any team that averages, I would say, over 200 yards per game on the ground is doing a pretty good job of it. That's led by Roman Hemby, who has over 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns, and then Kalen Black, who with 39 rushing yards in the national championship game, would also eclipse 1,000 yards, and he has 10 touchdowns. Another guy, Kobe Martin's an additional running back with over 500 yards and 6 touchdowns. The Indiana offensive line is one of the most experienced groups in the country. They have, I think, 171 combined starts. That starts with Carter Smith at left tackle, who was the Big Ten Offensive Lineman of the Year. Then you've got Pat Coogan, the Notre Dame transfer, at center, who was the Rose Bowl MVP, leading the way for that offensive line in their dismantling of Alabama. You've got left guard Drew Evans, right guard Bray Lynch, and right tackle Khalil Benson. Smith, Lynch, and Benson, I think, were all former 3-star recruits, so that speaks to Curt Cignetti's ability to develop players. And then Evans was a transfer from Wisconsin. They've allowed just 22 sacks on a season, but they're going to have their toughest test yet against the number 1 pass rushing defense in the country. That's Miami. They're first in the country with 47 sacks this season. Of course, that starts with Rueben Bain, the ACC Defensive Player of the Year, 13 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, along with Akeem Mesidor, who goes a little bit under the radar, but because of how teams focus so much on Bain, his numbers have seen kind of an improvement this year. He's actually finished with more sacks, 10.5 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, so look for him to be very disruptive and potentially trying to get that ball out from either the running backs or from Mendoza. And he also has 15.5 tackles for loss, which got him an all ACC first team selection. A few other guys on that defensive line, you've got Ahmad Moten, who has 8 tackles for loss, David Blay, Marquise Lightfoot, Armando Blunt, and Justin Scott. At linebacker, this is a solid unit. I think their strength is the defensive line, but you've got Wesley Basainth, who has 63 tackles, 1 sack, and an interception. Mohamed Toure, who has the team high 73 tackles, 2 sacks, and 5 pass deflections. And then 2 other guys to watch, Raul Aguirre and Chase Smith. Those 2 guys have combined for 56 tackles. Then at defensive back, I think the X factor in this game, and if he plays a big game like he did against Ohio State, Keionte Scott can be the difference maker for Miami. He has 61 tackles, which I think is maybe 3rd or 4th on the team. 13 tackles for loss, which is insane for a nickelback slot defensive back. 5 pass deflections, 2 interceptions, one of which was, of course, that pick 6 in the Cotton Bowl against Ohio State. He also has 2 forced fumbles and 2 fumble recoveries. Then you've got Jacoby Thomas, the safety, who has 5 interceptions to lead the team, 6 pass deflections. Starting cornerback, OJ Frederick. And then they've also got safety Zachariah Poyser. Another guy is Xavier Lucas, who has 8 pass deflections and an interception, but he is going to be out of the first half of this game because of a targeting call in the Fiesta Bowl against Ole Miss, the semifinal. In this side of the ball, I think Indiana has a very slight edge. I think their offense is just a little more potent, even compared against the strength of Miami, which is, of course, their defensive line. And I would say their DBs and their linebackers are no slouches either. But I think while Miami's game wreckers, which are Bain, Mesidor, and Scott especially, create havoc for Mendoza and maybe some issues, I think the run game and IU's passing game, the ability to balance both, gives them the edge here. Now, shifting gears to the other side of the ball, comparing Miami's offense against Indiana's defense. Miami averages 408 yards per game, 254 of which are passing, 153 of which are rushing, and 31.6 points per game, which is about 10 less than what Indiana's offense does. Indiana's defense, meanwhile, is probably right now the best in the country, statistically at least. They average only 11 points per game allowed, 261 yards per game, 186 passing, and 75 rushing. Miami converts on about 48% of the time on third down, while Indiana only gives up 30.3% of third down conversions. So starting things out at quarterback for Miami, it's obviously Carson Beck. He's thrown for 3,581 yards, 319 completions out of 435 attempts. So a lot more passes for Carson Beck compared to Fernando Mendoza. Part of that's due to a short field. Part of that's due to Indiana running the ball a little bit more. And by short fields, obviously, I mean Indiana's ability to create turnovers, which we'll talk about more kind of at the end of this preview. Then 29 touchdowns and 11 picks for Carson Beck. So keep an eye on that. Indiana has some playmakers who can take the ball away. Definitely going to be something to keep an eye on. Mendoza's only thrown 6 now. That could still be exploited, but definitely something a little bit more to keep an eye on is Carson Beck. At running back, you've got Mark Fletcher, who's an 1,000-yard rusher with 10 touchdowns. And then the combination of Charmar Brown and Gerard Pringle have combined for 844 yards and 11 touchdowns. At receiver, kind of similar to Indiana, Miami has kind of a three-headed beast. You've got Malachi Toney, the electric playmaker who has just shy of 1,100 yards, 9 touchdowns. Then you've got Keelan Marion, who has 740 yards and 2 touchdowns. And of course, CJ Daniels. I mean, the combination of Daniels and Toney is pretty much perfect for Miami. You've got Toney, who's a bit more of that electric guy who can make those plays, who can even step in as kind of a wildcat. And then you've got CJ Daniels, who's kind of more of that go up and get it threat. It's kind of similar. You know, Omar Cooper is kind of that. Elijah Sarratt is as well, but he's also a lot of ways a deep threat for them. CJ Daniels is just shy of 500 receiving yards, and he has 7 touchdowns. Looking at the line of scrimmage, on the right side, Miami has probably the best right tackle in college football this year. That's Francis Mauigoa. He is a lock to be an NFL draft pick, most likely a first rounder. You've got Markel Bell at left tackle, then left guard Matthew McCoy, center James Brockermeyer, and right guard Inez Cooper. Miami is one of the best teams in the country in terms of sacks allowed. In fact, I think they might be the best, allowing just 19 sacks all season, which in 15 games played means they're only giving up a tick over more than 1 per game, about 1 and a quarter, I think, about. And then Indiana, meanwhile, has 45 sacks. So they're just behind Miami in terms of how many sacks they've gotten this season. Now, a big part of that has been Stephen Daly. He, of course, was injured after that Big Ten championship game. His impact wasn't felt too much to be missed, I guess, in either the quarterfinal or the semifinal, but will it be now against a solid Miami offensive line? But stepping in for him, Tyreek Tucker has 12 tackles for loss and 6 sacks. Kellen Wright, 8 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. Mikhail Kamara, 7 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. And then Mario Landino with 6 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, 4 pass deflections, and 2 fumble recoveries. I think he's kind of a hidden gem on this Indiana defensive line, Landino is. He doesn't get as much of the credit. I think a lot of the names that we've talked about are either Tucker or Kamara or some of the linebackers, but I think Landino is certainly an under-the-radar guy who has made his presence felt and could be dangerous for Miami's offense. At linebacker, I think this is probably one of the best linebacker units in college football, and I didn't have them on my top 5 linebacker units before the season, but I think I'd have to now, and they might even take that number 1 spot. You've got Aiden Fisher, who has 91 tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, and 2 interceptions, I think one of which was a pick 6 earlier this season. You've then got Rolijah Hardy, who's the team leader with 99 tackles, 15 for loss, 8 sacks, and then 4 pass deflections. And then Isaiah Jones is kind of a do-it-all player. He's got 76 tackles, 15.5 for loss, which leads the team besides Daly, so leads active players. He's got 7 sacks, 1 pass deflection, an interception, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. So he's across the board there. You know, you look at like in the NBA, for example, and a guy who can score, rebound, pass, steal the ball, and get blocks. He is like a all-around player that also kind of, I think, takes a little bit of a backseat to the credit that Fisher and Hardy get. But Jones is just as much of a playmaker, if not more, as both of those 2 other linebackers. Then at DB, this is a really strong group as well. You've got the cornerbacks, D'Angelo Pons and Jamari Sharp. Pons has been probably the biggest Swiss Army knife X factor on this Indiana team. He has 55 tackles, 7 pass deflections, 2 interceptions. He has a pick 6, I think, and then 7 pass deflections and a forced fumble, and he also blocked a punt earlier this season. The pick 6, that was against Oregon. Yeah, so that's where the pick 6 came. It was the first play from scrimmage against the Ducks. And then Sharp has 4 forced fumbles. That's a key to watch too. So whether he's getting up and getting to the ball carrier, making an impact, you know, getting his hand or helmet in there to knock out the ball, or ripping out of a receiver's hands down the field, he does a great job at that. One of those he recovered. He also has 4 pass deflections. At safety, you've got Lewis Moore with 83 tackles, 3 pass deflections, and 6 interceptions. And then Amari Farrell, who has 47 tackles, 6 pass deflections, 4 interceptions. Another guy who can make a little bit of an impact here is Devin Boykin. He has 56 tackles, 5 pass deflections, 2 interceptions, and 2 fumble recoveries, one of which he returned for a touchdown. I think here Indiana defensively has a pretty clear edge to Miami's offense. Now, the Hurricanes can do some things. They can get pretty creative on offense. They can create some issues. But I think Indiana has a pretty clear advantage, and that's kind of just exclamated by the point that they have the best turnover margin in the country with plus 21. They have 18 interceptions and 11 fumble recoveries, which makes it 29 takeaways. They've also forced 12 fumbles. Miami has a plus 11 turnover margin, which is not bad. That's a big reason why they're here. 16 interceptions, 13 forced fumbles, 9 recoveries. So that brings it out to 25 takeaways. So they're not far behind Indiana. They do a really good job at both, but Indiana does it just a little bit better. And I think when you boil it down, I think Indiana has an edge really in all 3 categories of coaching, offense, and defense. Now, their biggest strength, which is their pass rush, might be just a tick better than Indiana's offensive line. So if they can really capitalize on that and exploit that and can create a big turnover by a guy like Jacoby Thomas or like Keionte Scott, or maybe Rueben Bain or Akeem Mesidor can get home and force a fumble on Mendoza. If they can do that, they'll be in this game and they'll have a chance to win it. But I think Indiana has proven by how they've played this season, by how Curt Cignetti has coached, that they are the best team in college football. I think they prove it on the field. They become the first team since Yale in the late 1890s to go 16-0 and stamp their place with a fairy tale ending to a fairy tale turnaround. I'm going with Indiana 31, Miami 21. But let me know in the comments down below what your prediction is for the national championship game and just your thoughts on both of these teams as we get ready for that game on Monday. But that is all for this episode of College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burnett. Thank you so much, all of you guys, for taking the time to watch this season. We'll have one more video breaking down the national championship after it happens. And then we're going to have a little bit of a rebrand in here. We got a cool sign that my brother actually got for me, a kind of custom LED CFT sign that'll be going up. So we're going to kind of be remodeling. Might be away for a little bit. I'll talk more about that maybe in my national championship breakdown. But thank you so much for taking the time to watch College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burnett, signing out. Peace.